Well, hello and welcome. This is the sermon for St. Christopher's Church congregation for Sunday, the 26th of April. It's great if anyone else who's not part of St. Christopher's is watching in as well. It's great to have you here, and hopefully you'll be blessed by what I share today. The passages for today are Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35, and 1 Peter 1, verses 10 to 25. So if you haven't yet read them, pause this video and then read them and come back to us in a moment. Most of you will know that my wife Sarah works at Leicester General Hospital, and at the moment she's working on wards with patients who have COVID-19. Of course, she's got her own PPE mask and goes through the careful process of washing hands and objects when she comes in and out of different wards. And when she gets home from work, she puts her clothes into the washing machine she's been wearing at work that day, and she showers. But even with all these precautions, there's certainly a chance the virus could be brought back to our house. And that's where I come in. Because you see, I can be a little bit obsessive compulsive about things sometimes. Some of you might have come across obsessive hand washers in your life. You know, those people who wash their hands like 50 times a day for no real reason. Well, at different times in my life, I've been one of those people. I first started doing it when I was a teenager, but it's come back from time to time, I think. And yes, it's something I'm wrestling with at the minute with the current coronavirus situation, and with, of course, with Sarah working on infected wards. And when I say obsessive compulsive, I'm talking about washing your hands for like 1.5 minutes. Forget the 20 seconds that everyone's been advised to do. I'm talking like 1.5 minutes, maybe even 2 minutes, making sure every little bit of every finger has been rubbed with soap and water at least twice, if not 3 times. It's over the top. And in my saner moments, I know it's over the top. But I'm afraid sometimes I'm just so in the moment, obsessively focusing on whether my fingertips or whatever are clean, that I just do not step back and ask the question, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Some of you might know and recognize the kind of mindset I'm talking about. And in all this, Sarah has been really helpful because she's brought me back to reality by telling me that in all likelihood, the virus spreading in ways I'm concerned about, the chances of it doing so are very low. But more than that, and far more importantly than that, she's reminded me that even if we did pick up coronavirus, we are followers of Jesus Christ and we are in God's hands. And we can trust him no matter what happens. In life or in death, our God has got everything covered. You see, my obsessive hand washing and all the stuff around it is based on being obsessively focused on the moment I'm in. It's about a kind of a tunnel vision need to control things down to the fine detail. And that means I'm not taking a step back at those times to think about the bigger picture. I'm not stopping to reflect on the fact that we find real, eternal security and safety only through our relationship with Jesus Christ, rather than in making sure that if this virus is on the back of your thumb or whatever, you've definitely killed it 3 times over. At those times, Sarah's input has been such a positive. You see, it's really easy to let the moment you're in shape what you think, feel, or do. And me telling you about the hand washing is me publicly confessing now that I've let this happen to me in negative ways at times. Sometimes we get lost in the moment The bigger picture vanishes from sight and we can't see the wood for the trees. Our passage from Luke's Gospel introduces us to two people who couldn't see the wood for the trees either. Two people who were so focused on the moment they were in that they couldn't see the bigger picture. They are two followers of Jesus, traveling from Jerusalem to a place called Emmaus, about a 7-mile journey. And they're traveling on that very first Easter Sunday. But they were sad because they thought Jesus' death meant the end. They didn't know he was alive. What they are thinking and feeling is focused on the tiniest little sliver of time between Jesus dying and coming back to life. They're basing things on being on in that moment. More than that, they know that some women who followed Jesus that very morning had said they'd found the tomb empty and they'd seen angels telling them he'd risen. That should be grounds for hope, right? Or at least grounds to make them think, okay, what is going on here? But if you read this passage, it doesn't seem to be the case. A mysterious traveller joins them as they walk, who we know is Jesus, and he asks them what they are talking about, and their answer is not positive in the slightest. In verse 17, we're told that they stand still, their faces downcast. For them, despite what the women had said that day, the last time anyone saw Jesus was when he was put into the tomb dead. And with Jesus dead, their hopes died with him. Hence their sadness, and hence why, if you look at verse 19, they had come to the conclusion that Jesus was only a prophet powerful in word and deed before God, yes, but only a prophet, not, verse 21, the one who would redeem Israel, i.e., the Messiah. They had come to their conclusions based on the moment they were in. They simply couldn't see the bigger picture. But then the mystery man who has joined them starts to speak. And what he says pulls them out of the moment they're in and gives them the perspective they need. He enables them to see the wood for the trees. Once the two had explained what's been happening to him, the mystery man rightly rebukes them. You see, despite having all the Old Testament which predicted that the Messiah would suffer and die before entering his glory, and despite Jesus telling the disciples multiple times before he was crucified that he was going to die and rise again, and despite the women only that morning saying that, yes, the tomb was empty and angels had told them he was risen, despite all of that, they can't get past the fact that Jesus died 2 days ago, and that's the last they saw of him. At the very least, you might think they'd look at all that evidence and say, you know, maybe Jesus has risen. Let's give it a few days and see if he turns up somewhere. But that doesn't seem to be where they're at. They're sad. For them, Jesus, the prophet, is now dead and it's time to move on. They're stuck in the moment. But they should have known better. And the mystery man points that out. So he says, verse 25, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. And from that point on, the mystery man gives them surely the most brilliant Bible study ever, as he explains to them that what was said in the Old Testament about the Messiah, the Christ. And whilst we don't know the exact details of what he taught them, he gives them the perspective and understanding they needed. He restores to them the big picture. He pulls them out of the moment they are trapped in. And more than that, he sets their hearts on fire with what he teaches them from the scriptures. Look later in verse 32. The two speak to each other and say, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They became excited as they walked, as hope started to rise again in their hearts and minds as this mystery man taught them about the Messiah. The Messiah did indeed have to suffer these things before entering his glory. It was all part of the plan. What a difference walking and talking with this mystery man had made to them. They had renewed perspective. They had renewed hope. But as well as renewed hope, they receive renewed fellowship with their master and friend, Jesus. Near the end of the passage, the two disciples finally recognize the mystery man as their risen Lord. He was the one walking and talking with them. And when the two arrive at the place where they were staying for the night, they persuade the mystery man to stop there with them as well. And at that place where they are about to eat, it says in verse 30, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Now, what you won't notice, because I didn't notice it either, is that this is very similar to what Jesus did at the Last Supper. The words used to describe what he does there and what he does here are almost the same. At the Last Supper, we are told he takes bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it to them. And it's the same here. He takes bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and begins to give it to them. After the Bible study on the road, now at the dinner table, he chooses the moment of breaking bread, just like at the Last Supper, to be the moment when he is revealed to them. You see, at the Last Supper, Jesus brought all of the Old Testament hopes about the forgiveness of sins through the shedding of blood, about the promise of salvation, about reconciliation with God. He brings it, all of these hopes together and centers them on himself as the one who would fulfill them. He based that final Passover meal he would eat with his disciples, the Last Supper, around himself, around what he was about to do for them. He reframes the whole thing around himself in a very special, intimate meal with his friends. He didn't just teach them about who he was and what he would accomplish. He didn't just get them to look at the broken bread at that Last Supper, his body given for them. He gave the bread to them. He invited his friends, who he knew by name, to share in what he was about to achieve on their behalf. The Old Testament gave the big picture, but in breaking bread at both the Last Supper and here with the two travelers, he makes it really personal. He brings his disciples into all of those promises as they eat with him, as they eat with God. The two travelers receive renewed perspective and renewed intimate fellowship with their friend and their master, Jesus. Some of you might have heard of someone called Brother Andrew, who was a Dutch Christian who smuggled Bibles into communist countries during the Cold War. Communism, of course, not being at all friendly to Christianity and Christians. And Brother Andrew had to go through many border checks where if the guards had found the Bibles, they would have been confiscated or destroyed, and he perhaps arrested and imprisoned. But time and time and time again, God would make it so that the guards never found or never saw the Bibles he was carrying. He had a prayer that he used to pray as he came to try and smuggle the Bibles through the border posts, and it went like this: Lord, in my luggage I have scripture I want to take to your children. When you were on earth, you made blind eyes see. Now I pray, make seeing eyes blind. Do not let the gods see those things you do not want them to see. And on one occasion, when his car was packed full of Bibles which he was trying to smuggle into Romania, he saw at the border checkpoint that all 4 cars in front of him in the queue had all been very, very thoroughly searched. The car in front of him was searched for the longest. The hubcaps were even taken off, the engine was taken apart, and the seats taken out, as the search for anything that was deemed illegal by the communists went on. Now, at that moment, my temptation would be to focus on the moment, to focus on the detail of what was happening and lose the bigger picture that God was in control. Maybe turn around and drive away and try some other time when it's a little bit less scary or a little bit less risky. But Andrew had the perspective that God was in control, and therefore he did not need to get lost in the panic of the moment. And when the moment came for Andrew's car to be searched, amazingly, the guards simply waved him through without searching it at all, without even asking him to get out of the car. Andrew had the perspective that because God was in charge of the big picture, he also was in charge of the detail. He was in charge of the moment that he was in. When I get stuck in obsessive thinking, when I get trapped in the moment, whether washing my hands or whatever, what I need is fresh perspective. I need the big picture to shape what I think, what I feel, and what I do. And at times I don't do that. I'm reading Jesus' words of rebuke to the 2 in verse 25 when he says, "How foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe." Well, I can really feel that those words might well be applied to me at times. Perhaps you feel that as well. But if that's the case, please notice that although Jesus starts with those words of rebuke, he then, in patience and grace and love, teaches those 2 disciples and sets their hearts on fire with renewed hope and understanding. And going beyond that, in the intimacy of being sat around the dinner table, he revealed who he was in the breaking of bread to his 2 friends. If you feel you can't stop focusing on the moment you're in, if you're letting it shape your thinking or feeling or doing in negative ways, come to the Lord and ask for his fresh perspective. Read the Bible and ask God to show you the big picture and to set your heart on fire with what you find there. And in discovering that renewed perspective, ask God for a greater sense of his presence. Ask God to lead you through the power and presence of the Holy Spirit into greater intimacy with the risen Jesus as one of his friends. Not just knowing the facts, but knowing him. One of his friends sat at his table. Seek from him fresh perspective and renewed fellowship. Thank you. You might now just want to take some time to pray based on what you have heard.